The sun was beginning to rise behind the Manhattan skyscrapers when 29-year-old Ethan Cole crossed the street with quick steps, dodging cars, horns, and hurried executives. The cold wind whipped against his face, but it didn't bother him. He was used to facing the day with little more than determination and cheap coffee in his pockets. The tall building where he worked as an administrative assistant always seemed to mock him, its mirrored windows reflecting a man who carried too much effort and too little recognition. That morning, Ethan was trying to balance a box of files, his cell phone vibrating incessantly, and the need to avoid dropping everything on the sidewalk. He didn't succeed. The box slipped from his hands, papers flew out, and he cursed under his breath before running after the sheets dancing in the wind. Two teenagers laughed as they passed him, but Ethan didn't care. It wasn't the first time he'd been the unwitting entertainment for strangers. As he gathered the documents, his wristwatch vibrated, drawing his attention to the time. He was already late, again, and his boss, a man who seemed born irritable, always used lateness to remind him of his inferior position. Even so, Ethan knew he couldn't lose that job. It was the only thin thread separating him from utter financial collapse. Upon entering the office, the atmosphere remained the same as always. Frantic keyboards, ringing phones, and people pretending to know exactly what they were doing. Ethan walked to his desk without attracting attention. No one there truly saw him. He was too efficient to be dismissed, but too invisible to be recognized. This was his life: work, pay bills, survive. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, inside a mansion with more square footage than he could have imagined, Charles Davenport, a real estate magnate, awoke with the comfortable slowness of someone who had never been in a hurry for anything. Owner of a fortune so vast that his lawyers took hours to explain even the simplest asset update, Charles lived surrounded by luxury and suspicion. His wealth attracted sycophants, self-interested relatives, and people who approached him with calculated smiles. Charles had no direct heirs. He never wanted children and never trusted his few living relatives. To him, almost everyone was a parasite waiting for his death. The only people who seemed genuinely close were employees he had kept for decades, and even he distrusted them too. That morning, Charles received a brown envelope on his desk, delivered by a long-time employee. The envelope bore the confidential stamp of the most discreet lawyer he had ever hired. Charles didn't like surprises, but he opened the envelope with the same coldness he had when closing multi-million-dollar deals. As he slid the papers out, he found legal documents, dates, signatures, and something that made him frown: a reminder about updating his will. He ignored it for a few seconds, putting everything aside as he always did. He didn't like to think about death, not even his own. Meanwhile, Ethan went about his ordinary day, trying to answer emails, organize documents, and keep his head down. He didn't know, and couldn't possibly know, that his life was about to collide with that of the tycoon who lived surrounded by opulence, and that this collision would happen in such an improbable way that anyone would laugh at the possibility, at least until they saw what was written in the will. The first sign that something strange was about to happen came in the middle of the afternoon, when Ethan was summoned to his boss's office. The assistant, always in a hurry, always analyzing everything with a critical eye, simply pointed to the door without saying a word. Ethan took a deep breath. Another lecture, more work piled up, maybe even a warning. He entered resignedly, but the boss wasn't ready to yell. In fact, he seemed confused, as if trying to fit pieces of a puzzle together. He was holding an envelope and, upon seeing Ethan, simply pushed the object forward on the table with abrupt movements. The gesture clearly said, "This is not my problem." It was an envelope with Ethan's full name written in elegant handwriting, accompanied by the stamp of a law firm he'd never heard of. Normally, Ethan would have thrown it straight in the trash, thinking it was advertising or some overdue bill. But something about the weight of the envelope made him hesitate. He opened it right there. The documents inside were formal, dry, and to the point, a summons to appear at a will reading. Ethan frowned. He didn't know anyone rich, much less anyone who could leave him anything. His heart raced with a mixture of alertness and curiosity. Was it some kind of scam, a mix-up of names, a monumental administrative error? While his boss was already telling him to leave so he could continue working, Ethan stared at the paper again. It was too real to be a prank, too formal to be a casual mistake. The name at the top was unmistakable, Charles Davenport, and even without understanding anything, Ethan realized that this had the potential to turn his life upside down. But why? And what connection could he possibly have with a billionaire tycoon he'd never met in his life? These questions echoed in Ethan's mind, but no answers came. All he had was an invitation, or perhaps a warning, to attend the reading of a will that made absolutely no sense. And that was just the beginning. Ethan spent the rest of the day torn between curiosity and the feeling that it was all an absurd mistake. Every time he tried to focus on his work, the summons to read the will would pop into his mind as an involuntary interruption. He knew he had no connection to the world of the rich, much less to a name as famous as Charles Davenport's. And yet, the document was there, with his name written precisely, almost elegantly. It was impossible to ignore. When he finally left the office in the early evening, the characteristic New York winter chill hit him hard. He shoved his hands into his pockets as he walked along the crowded sidewalk, absorbing the energy of the city that seemed never to rest. The lights, the sounds, the hustle and bustle, it was all part of the scenery he had always lived in, but which now seemed slightly out of place, as if something was about to change its tone. On his way to the subway, Ethan received a new message from the law firm, a reminder about the will reading and a confirmation of the time. Nothing in the text indicated confusion or error. They were expecting him. Specifically, him. Not knowing what to think, Ethan decided to go. It wouldn't make sense to refuse, nor to pretend the invitation didn't exist. If it was a mistake, at least he could resolve everything in person. And if it wasn't, well, he didn't even know how to finish that sentence mentally. In the days leading up to the meeting, Ethan's routine remained the same, but the inner tension grew. The world around him, however, continued to follow the frenetic pace of urban life. He observed co-workers who always seemed to be competing to see who was busiest, neighbors who crossed paths without ever exchanging more than a superficial nod, and taxi drivers who argued over parking spaces as if every inch of asphalt were a battleground. It was a demanding but familiar environment, and profoundly distant from the mansion where Charles Davenport lived. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the tycoon's death quietly stirred a circle of people who revolved around his money. Some distant relatives emerged like vultures, contacting lawyers, demanding rights, and trying to find any clue about who the main heir might be. Ethan's name had never been mentioned among them, not because it was a secret, but because no one there had any idea who he was. For all these relatives, the most important question was, what did Charles leave behind, and for whom? The lawyer responsible for the will, Howard Blackwell, was a discreet, meticulous man, completely indifferent to the drama unfolding around the Davenport fortune. He was known for his impeccable precision and his track record of not making mistakes. If Ethan's name was in the document, it wasn't accidental, at least not on his part. Howard spent his nights reviewing the papers, making sure everything was in order for the reading. He had already dealt with entire families in catastrophic disputes, but he felt this one would be particularly complicated. The absence of direct heirs and Charles's inflexible reputation were perfect ingredients for conflict. In the corridors of his office, it was rumored that the will contained such a big surprise that it would completely change the logic of that inheritance. No one, however, knew exactly which one. As the appointed day approached, Ethan tried to understand his own origins. He had never known his father. He grew up only with his mother, a kind and hard-working woman who avoided talking about her past. She never mentioned names, detailed stories, or anything that might indicate a connection to someone important. Ethan spent part of his childhood believing that his father was merely a mistake from his mother's youth, or perhaps someone who didn't want to take responsibility. Precisely for this reason, the summons for the reading of the will raised an even more unsettling question. What if there was something your mother never told you? The city continued its relentless movement. But for Ethan, every street now seemed brimming with possibilities. He watched wealthy people getting out of luxury cars, entering buildings with lined-up doormen and silent elevators, environments that were not part of his reality. The idea that he could, even remotely, have some connection to that universe seemed too fantastical to be taken seriously, and yet the invitation was there. Real, concrete. For Charles Davenport's relatives, all with comfortable lives but driven by ambition, the reading of the will was awaited with growing anxiety. Some gathered in expensive cafes to speculate. Others maintained contact with outside lawyers, trying to exploit legal loopholes. There were those who planned trips, house moves, new investments, all based on an inheritance they didn't even know if they would receive. It was a stark portrait of human ambition, motivated not by legacy or affection, but by expectation. And while all these pieces moved without his knowledge, Ethan was simply preparing to attend a meeting he didn't even understand. He had no idea he was about to enter a world where every secret held weight, and every decision made by someone he'd never met could change everything. The morning of the will reading arrived sooner than Ethan had expected. The biting cold seemed even more intense as he walked to the law firm located in one of Manhattan's most sophisticated areas. It was a world he observed from the outside. Cafes where executives closed multi-million-dollar deals, imported cars perfectly lined up along the sidewalks, uniformed doormen who eyed each person with a calculated gaze. Ethan didn't fit into that scene at all. The simple coat, the worn briefcase, the attentive gaze trying to decipher where he was stepping. Everything contrasted with the artificial elegance around him. Upon entering the building's lobby, a receptionist looked at him as if he were lost, but when he mentioned his name, she simply nodded and directed him to the elevator. There was no surprise, no questioning. They were indeed expecting him. When the doors opened on the indicated floor, Ethan found himself in a spacious room with glass walls and a long table where several people were already seated. He noticed immediate glances directed at him, some of bewilderment, others of disdain. It was clear that no one there had any idea who he was. Ethan took a discreet seat in the corner. The atmosphere was tense, as if each person were about to claim something valuable and contested. In the center of the table, lawyer Howard Blackwell organized papers with the meticulous calm of someone accustomed to managing conflicts. Once everyone was seated, he began the formal reading. It was a lengthy text, full of legal clauses, instructions, and estate provisions. Ethan tried to follow along, but the technical language confused him. Even so, he noticed the silent reactions of the others present, furrowed brows, muffled whispers, growing unease. Many of the relatives mentioned received significant assets, but nothing that compared to the total remaining fortune. Then Howard turned the page and adopted an even more formal tone. And as for the primary beneficiary of my estate, including properties, stocks, investments, and other assets not previously specified, the entire room fell into absolute silence. Ethan felt his heart beat faster for no apparent reason. It had nothing to do with him. It couldn't. Howard continued, I hereby declare Ethan Cole as the sole heir. For a few seconds, nothing moved. The breath in the room seemed to disappear completely. Ethan blinked, looking around to make sure he had heard correctly. The shocked expressions on his relatives' faces confirmed that he hadn't imagined it. An elegantly dressed woman slammed her hand on the table, disgusted by the idea. "Who is this boy?" she demanded, her voice thick with indignation. An older man, probably one of Charles's distant cousins, leaned forward, glaring at Ethan. "This must be some kind of scam. I've never heard of that name." Murmurs erupted around him. Ethan could barely process the information. He wanted to stand up, deny it, explain that he knew nothing, but nothing came out of his mouth. Shock paralyzed him. Howard, maintaining his professional composure, raised one hand to calm the room. "All the documents have been verified many times," he stated. "The name is in the legitimate will, updated by Mr. Davenport himself before his death." "That's ridiculous," insisted one of the relatives. "He must have manipulated something. How could someone like that?" The man gestured towards Ethan's simple clothes. "Be Charles's heir?" Ethan felt his face flush, but he took a deep breath. If he opened his mouth at that moment, any word would sound like an excuse, an attempt to defend himself. And he himself barely understood the situation. Howard then positioned a folder in front of everyone. "There's also a letter left by Mr. Davenport addressed exclusively to Mr. Cole," he said, looking directly at Ethan. "It's supposed to be read only by him in private." The commotion intensified, but Howard didn't back down. He pointed to a side room and indicated that Ethan should follow him. Ethan stood, his legs trembling, feeling piercing stares follow him as he crossed the room. He entered the smaller room, where the softer light contrasted sharply with the intense tension he had left behind. Howard closed the door and offered him the letter. It was a simple blue envelope with firm handwriting. Ethan opened it slowly, feeling as if he were about to discover a truth buried for decades. The letter began with few words, but they immediately shattered any sense of stability. "If you're reading this, it means you already know who I am, and now you need to know who you are." Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. His hands trembled as he turned the following lines, where Charles Davenport explained that, many years ago, he had had a brief but significant relationship with his mother. It hadn't been a love story, nor a melodramatic romance. It was an unexpected encounter between different worlds, an encounter from which Ethan was born, something Charles only discovered too late. According to the letter, Charles had spent years discreetly tracking Ethan's life, respecting the mother's wish that her son never had any contact with that world. Charles stayed away, but observed. And when he realized his life was coming to an end, he decided to leave everything to Ethan, the only human being to whom he somehow felt a real responsibility. When he finished reading, Ethan closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to reject everything. Another part felt the weight of a story that had never been told to him. It was as if all the pieces of his life were being rearranged before his eyes. He opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and realized that nothing would be simple from then on. Being the heir of a man he had never met didn't make him accepted by others. It only placed him at the center of a conflict that had just begun. And those who felt entitled to the fortune were not about to accept the situation quietly. As he left the room with Howard, Ethan felt the atmosphere in the hallway change. Charles's relatives had gathered in small groups, exchanging glances heavy with suspicion and strategy. None of them seemed willing to accept the revelation, and this was evident in the way some of them watched him, as if assessing an intruder who needed to be removed. Howard, sensing the tension, quickly guided Ethan to the elevator. "I recommend you go home for now," he said. "There will be much to discuss in the coming days, but for now it's best to avoid any confrontation." Ethan simply nodded. He still couldn't formulate questions or answers. When he reached the street, he took a deep breath, trying to absorb the shock. The letter, still tucked into the inside pocket of his coat, felt like it weighed 5 kilos. It was like carrying not only the revealed past, but also a future he wasn't sure he wanted. As he walked to the subway, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street, with its engine running. The tinted windows prevented him from seeing who was inside. He ignored it. New York was always full of cars like that. But a few blocks further on, he saw the same vehicle slowly turning the corner. This time, the unease was impossible to ignore. In the subway car, Ethan gripped the metal bar tightly as he tried to organize his thoughts. But the feeling of being watched didn't disappear. As he got off at the station near his apartment, he looked back once more. No one was following him, but still fear crept in. Maybe he was just paranoid, or maybe Charles's relatives weren't willing to wait for court decisions. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, the first subplot gained momentum. Inside a sophisticated bar, Vivian Davenport, a distant niece and one of the most vocal opponents of the inheritance, discussed the event with Noah Brandt, her occasional partner in risky business ventures. Vivian was known for never showing defeat and for always seeking ways to turn the tables. For her, Ethan's appearance was more than a blow to family pride. It was an obstacle that needed to be removed quickly. "Do you think he'll accept all this easily?" Noah asked, analyzing her reactions. "It doesn't matter what he accepts," Vivian replied, crossing her legs with sharp elegance. "What matters is what we can prove. If there's any opening, any weakness, we'll take him down." Noah smiled slightly. He had always appreciated the way Vivian saw the world, like a chessboard where pieces could be moved, broken, or replaced as needed. But Vivian wasn't alone in her ambition. Another relative, Gregory Heir, a distant cousin of Charles and an aggressive investor known for his shady connections, was also plotting. He saw Ethan not only as a financial threat, but as a personal affront. Gregory was used to controlling situations with intimidation, shady deals, and dangerous favors. For him, solving the Ethan problem required immediate action, and not necessarily within the law. While these parallel conflicts unfolded, Ethan tried to resume his routine, albeit unsuccessfully. At work, his mind wandered. He found himself rereading the letter several times a day, as if hoping to find some hidden clue. He avoided discussing anything with colleagues, knowing that no one would believe him, or worse still, that they would spread rumors. However, a new complexity arose when the media began sniffing around the case. A reporter specializing in financial scandals, Mark Ellison, discovered leaks about the existence of a mysterious heir and began investigating. He was known for exposing corrupt businessmen and never observed very strict ethical boundaries. When Mark found the name Ethan Cole linked to the Davenport inheritance, he began to follow the young man's every move, trying to understand who he was and why a tycoon would leave him everything. Mark wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for headlines. This invisible pressure intensified the web of conflicts surrounding Ethan, who remained oblivious to most of the plotting events. However, one of the secondary characters was destined to get close to him. Lara Jensen, assistant to lawyer Howard. Intelligent and organized, she had a habit of observing everything with critical attention. When she noticed the aggressive glances directed at Ethan during his reading, she sensed that he would need someone willing to help him navigate this new world. Lara began sorting through documents, tracking down information, and organizing details that could help him protect himself legally. She didn't know Ethan personally, but she was impressed by how he handled the situation without arrogance or manipulation, something rare among wealthy families. With all these forces at play, ambitious relatives, a ruthless reporter, a seasoned lawyer, a watchful assistant, and a young heir caught between two worlds, the central conflict branched out in dangerous directions. And yet, no one knew that Charles Davenport had left behind more than just money. There were secrets, documents, and choices that, once revealed, would cause each of these subplots to collide violently. Ethan, however, was still walking blindly, but not for long. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Reading the will, the hostile stares, the suspicious car, everything was jumbled in his mind like a jigsaw puzzle without edges. At 3 in the morning, he got up, made coffee, even though it was dark outside, and decided to face the contents of the folder Howard had given him. Until then, he had only read the letter. The rest remained sealed as if it could be bitten. Inside were copies of documents, financial statements, old photographs, and something Ethan hadn't expected, a medical report. The name Charles Davenport was at the top, followed by diagnoses, dates, and a detail that sent chills down his spine. The tycoon had discovered his terminal illness 3 months before locating Ethan. In other words, it wasn't an impulsive act. Charles sought out the heir after learning that he had little time left. Ethan flipped through the pages until he found a smaller envelope, sealed with red wax. The stamp bore the initials CD. He hesitated for a moment but opened it. Inside was another letter, this time longer, denser, more intimate. Ethan, if you are reading this, then time has been cruel to me, but perhaps kind to you. I know I was absent. I know I wasn't a father, not even a distant friend. When I discovered my illness, I realized that the only thing I never bought was time, and that's precisely what I had wasted on you. I don't want you to accept my inheritance as a prize. I want you to accept it as an apology. But I know that's not enough. That's why I left you something else, a choice. Don't be fooled by what they'll say. There are people around this name who would do anything to destroy it. But there's something even bigger at stake. Ethan, you are not just my heir. You're the only one who can finish what I started. The final sentence hit him like a blow. What did Charles mean? End what? The tone of the letter didn't seem metaphorical. It seemed direct. And if there was more to be discovered, there was also more they could hide from him. For the first time since the beginning of that turmoil, Ethan felt something other than fear. He felt purpose. He carefully closed the envelope and picked up his cell phone. He needed to talk to Howard in the morning. On the other side of town, reporter Mark Ellison was also awake. At a cluttered desk, surrounded by clippings and maps of connections, he analyzed the Davenport family with the obsession of a seasoned hunter. Up to that point, Ethan Cole was a character with no criminal record, no wealth, no controversies, which made him even more suspicious to Mark. Nobody appears out of nowhere, he murmured to himself, and nobody receives millions without a story behind it. He enlarged a photograph from the previous afternoon, showing Ethan leaving the law office. Something about the young man's face stood out. There was no arrogance, no enthusiasm, just confusion. It wasn't the look of a con man. It was the look of someone thrown into a war without being consulted. Mark wrote that down, then he crossed it out. He wasn't writing to defend anyone. Meanwhile, Vivian Davenport returned to her private office in Midtown. In the center of the room was an old safe embedded in the wall. From it, she retrieved a black leather dossier. Inside were records dating back to the 1980s, enough time for many secrets to be buried. She carefully flipped through the pages, ending at a yellowed photograph. It was a younger Charles, standing next to a woman. The handwritten caption read, "The only decision I will never regret." Vivian stared at the photo with a hard expression. To her, that wasn't romance. It was weakness. And weakness, in business, was deadly. So it was her, he whispered. Now everything made sense to her, and if it made sense, it could be used. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Howard's office and found Lara Jensen making coffee. She greeted him with a discreet but sincere smile. "Is it difficult to sleep?" he asked. "Not at all," Ethan replied. "I figured. Howard is already waiting for you, but—" She approached cautiously. "If you need help understanding any document, I can guide you." "There are things that aren't so clear at first glance." Ethan thanked her. Lara noticed something new in his eyes, a determination that hadn't been there the day before. Howard, seated behind a large desk, stood up when he saw him enter. "Ethan, we need to talk about the next step." "Before that," Ethan interrupted, "I need to know what my father meant by finishing what I started." Howard froze for a moment. He hadn't expected that question so soon. "There are things Charles didn't even discuss with me." he replied, choosing his words carefully, but I can assure you he left instructions. However, he placed a thick envelope on the table. You can only open this after you formally accept the inheritance. Ethan swallowed hard. There lay the door to the truth, but also to a world that could destroy him. He took a deep breath. Then let's accept it. Howard smiled tensely. Lara, standing by the door, seemed to know that this moment would change everything, and it changed. Ethan took the first step into the life of a man he had never met, and into a secret that many were willing to kill to keep from coming to light. Ethan's decision to officially accept the inheritance spread faster than he had imagined. Within hours, notifications began appearing on his cell phone. Calls from unknown numbers, suspicious emails, messages from journalists. He ignored them all. Howard had been clear. Any misinterpreted word could be used against him. When he left the lawyer's building, the sidewalk was already packed. 2 reporters tried to intercept him, and cameras surrounded him as if he were a reluctant celebrity. Ethan. Did you know about the fatherhood before he died? Is it true that Charles hid you out of the country? Are you prepared to manage the Davenport empire? He didn't answer. Howard discreetly pulled him into a car and closed the door before the questions became more personal. This is going to get worse, the lawyer warned. You're now a visible target, and not just for journalists. What Howard didn't say, but Lara instantly realized, was that his own relatives were about to react with full force. Vivian Davenport, upon seeing the news on the financial channels, threw a glass of whiskey against the wall. The impact echoed through the luxurious apartment, but brought no relief. He accepted, he growled. Noah Brandt, sitting on the sofa, watched with irritating calm. What did you expect? That a poor boy would refuse millions? It's not about the money, she retorted. It's about control. Now he has something I need. And what do you intend to do? Vivian opened a drawer and pulled out the file she had found the previous night. She slammed it on the table. I'm going to show the world who he really is. But there was a problem. Some of the material was explosive, but it also incriminated members of her own family. If she used it all, not only would Ethan fall, the Davenports would fall with him. Noah understood the dilemma. You're hesitating. That's rare. Vivian closed the dossier forcefully. I never hesitate. I just plan. Meanwhile, Gregory Hale, the ambitious cousin, was in a private meeting with 2 men who definitely didn't work in offices. In a discreet restaurant in Chelsea, he negotiated with them as one might choose wine for dinner. I want you to monitor that boy's every move, discreetly, Gregory said, fidgeting with his gold wedding ring. No violence. Yet. Just bring me information. Vulnerabilities. There's always one. One of the men nodded, but the other questioned. And what if there isn't one? Gregory smiled. There always is. Ethan didn't know it, but his life was beginning to be scrutinized, as if it were an intelligence operation. In Howard's office, Lara was overseeing the official acceptance of the inheritance. While organizing documents, she noticed something strange on an estate transfer form, a detail that didn't appear in the records provided by the family. Howard, this here, she pointed to the discrepancy. $1 million expenses, personal withdrawals, hidden investments, all done in the last 5 years. But Charles didn't sign this. Howard adjusted his glasses, studying the pages. I recognize this forged signature. I know exactly who did this. Lara's eyes widened. Gregory? Yes. The lawyer sighed. He manipulated funds even before Charles became ill, and now he's desperate to avoid an audit that Ethan, as the new heir, will inevitably demand. This changed everything. Ethan not only inherited wealth, he inherited desperate enemies. That night, Ethan was walking home when he noticed something different in the hallway. The door to his apartment was slightly ajar. He never left it like that. His heart raced. Cautiously, he pushed the door open. The interior was silent, but not intact. His computer had been turned on. The drawer where he kept documents was ransacked. The envelope containing Charles's letter had been moved. He didn't hear footsteps, but he felt it. Someone had been there, and they weren't looking for money. They were looking for information. Before she could process it, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered because something inside him told him he should. A cold, anonymous male voice spoke. "You're dealing with bigger things than you realize. Turn back while you still can." "Who are you?" Ethan tried to keep his voice steady. "Someone who understands what's about to happen, and someone who knows you won't survive if you continue." The call dropped. Ethan froze for a few seconds, then clenched his fist. The fear was still there, but something new was emerging: indignation. He wasn't going to give up. The next day, Howard called an urgent meeting at the office. When Ethan arrived, he found the lawyer, Lara, and another person, a woman of about 50, with a firm posture and a stern expression. "Ethan," Howard said, "this is Agent Rebecca Sloan from the Department of Justice. She was investigating Charles before his death." Ethan paled. "Was my father being investigated?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly. He was cooperating. He had sensitive documents and information about illegal operations involving associated companies, including members of his own family." The air instantly became heavy. "And now that you've inherited it," she continued, "all of this is yours. With that comes responsibility and danger." Ethan felt a nerve throbbing in his neck. Did he know this would happen to me? Howard placed a folder in front of him. He knew, and left specific instructions. Rebecca crossed her arms. "And you don't have much time. Your enemies know you inherited more than just possessions. You inherited secrets, and they want to destroy them along with you." Ethan swallowed hard. Now he understood his father's phrase, "Finish what I started." And he also understood the weight of that legacy. It wasn't luck. It was war. Rebecca's revelation didn't leave Ethan shaken for long. The next morning, he showed up at Howard's office earlier than the lawyer had anticipated, without dark circles under his eyes, without hesitation, just determined. "I want to understand everything," he declared, even before sitting down, "and I want to know exactly what my father left me." Howard studied him like one observes a newly awakened wild animal. The transformation was evident. The insecurity that had accompanied him since their first meeting was now giving way to something more solid: conviction. Rebecca opened the folder she had brought the previous day. There was nothing theatrical about the gesture, just straightforwardness. "Your father was tracking illicit financial transactions in companies linked to the Davenport family. Money laundering, tax evasion, influence peddling. He gathered evidence, but didn't have time to hand it over." Ethan flipped through documents, charts, bank statements. The sheer volume was daunting. This information could destroy political careers, entire corporations, and especially everyone who had a vested interest in his disappearance. "Why didn't he hand this over sooner?" Ethan asked. "Because I needed to make sure you were safe first," Rebecca replied. "And because I didn't trust anyone in the family." Ethan took a deep breath. The idea of his father, a man he had never known, living surrounded by threats, created a bitter yet empowering image. "He knew I'd want to finish what he started," Ethan murmured, "even without knowing me." Howard watched him with a glint of restrained pride. "Do you know what to do with this?" Ethan closed the folder. "I know I can't run away." Ethan's first concrete action was to demand a full audit of the Davenport companies. The mere news of the audit sent the board of directors into a panic, not because Ethan had power, but because they were used to acting without oversight. Some tried to downplay his decision, treating him as an impulsive boy. But when Ethan appeared in the conference room with Rebecca by his side and the reports in hand, the atmosphere changed. He didn't raise his voice. He simply presented the facts. "These records have been falsified," he stated, pointing to the documents projected on the screen. "And I want total transparency. From today onwards, no financial transaction will be approved without my signature." There were protests, attempts at intimidation, insinuations that he didn't know what he was doing. Ethan didn't back down. "You may disagree," he said firmly, "but you can't stop me. I am the legal heir, and you will cooperate. The alternative is for federal justice to get in here before you finish this sentence." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any threat. Meanwhile, Lara worked tirelessly alongside him. She not only organized reports and documents, she was the one who translated complicated bureaucracy, found hidden patterns, and anticipated potential attacks. One night, after hours of cross-referencing data, she said, "Ethan, your father also reported sabotage attempts against him, including one very similar to what happened in your apartment. Then they'll try again." Lara held his gaze for a few seconds. "And you can't face this alone." He recognized the truth immediately. For years he had survived his own seams, but this was different. This conflict demanded strategy and allies. For the first time, Ethan allowed someone to share the weight of the fight. The change in his posture began to bother his opponents. Vivian, realizing that Ethan wasn't backing down, intensified her movements. Gregory, in turn, became even more desperate when he learned about the audit. "He's screwing me over," she yelled, slamming her hand on the table. "He's doing what you would do in his place," Noah taunted, undeterred. "Don't compare me to that kid." But it was too late. Ethan was no longer the kid they had imagined. Gregory made a classic mistake. He underestimated the enemy's transformation. The most striking moment in this evolution came during an impromptu meeting between Ethan, Rebecca, and Howard. The federal agent had placed a map of the United States on the table, marking the locations of companies involved in the investigated scheme. "Charles intended to expose all of this in a national trial," Rebecca explained. "He knew it would affect very influential people, but he believed the truth would be enough." Ethan glanced at the map, absorbing its gravity. "He believed in justice," he said. Rebecca corrected. "He believed in you." That changed something inside Ethan. It was no longer about inheritance, fortune, or survival. It was about honoring a legacy that almost no one knew existed. He straightened his shoulders. "Then I'll do what he couldn't. This is going to cost you dearly," Rebecca warned. "It's going to change your whole life." Ethan did not hesitate. "My life changed the moment I first walked into that office." Howard nodded proudly. "In that case," said the lawyer, pushing an envelope toward him, "the time has come for you to learn the last instruction your father left for this matter." Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a single sentence, written by Charles. "When you understand the magnitude of the truth, seek out the person you fear most," he retorted, confused. "The person I fear most?" Rebecca crossed her arms. "And who would that be?" Ethan answered without thinking. "Vivian." It was there that his trajectory ceased to be merely a reaction to circumstances and transformed into an active, calculated, and courageous movement. He needed to face Vivian Davenport, and for the first time, not as a lost boy, but like the heir she could never control. Ethan's decision to confront Vivian wasn't impulsive. It was strategic. In the days following his father's note, he observed her every move, her meetings, her contacts, her routines. Not with paranoia, but with calculated precision. The audit was already underway, and each document analyzed revealed yet another layer of corruption spread over years. If Vivian was at the center, then all roads would inevitably lead to her. Meanwhile, other subplots began to align. The break-in at Ethan's apartment, previously an isolated event, now made sense. Someone within the family was trying to locate evidence that Charles had hidden. The anonymous phone call, Gregory's movements, Noah's sudden silence, everything was taking shape. Rebecca increased Ethan's security, but he refused conspicuous escorts. "If she shows up surrounded by agents, she'll back down," he explained, "and I need her to show what she's really like." Howard tried to reason with him, but realized that the young man was no longer guided by fear, but rather by a clear understanding of his role. He carried the inheritance not as a prize, but as a weapon, and he intended to use it with precision. Lara played a crucial role in this phase. During a late-night work session, she found a set of encrypted emails between Charles and a contact identified only as R. She read them carefully, deciphering the code pattern until she revealed the real message. When she finished, she urgently called Ethan. "He left you a clue," she said, handing over the pages. "Your father was preparing a public revelation, but he needed one final piece of evidence, and that evidence is in Vivian's private safe." Ethan scanned the content, absorbing every piece of information. "This changes everything," he murmured. "She's not just involved, she's the key. And she knows that you know," Lara added. The time pressure was now real. The family was beginning to realize that the audit was no simple bureaucracy. Vivian had already dismissed 2 executives who could cooperate with Ethan. Gregory, cornered, tried to erase his tracks, but Rebecca's team recovered every digital fragment he deleted. If Ethan hesitated, he would lose the advantage. He decided to act. On a cold morning in Manhattan, Ethan entered the Davenport building, ignoring hostile stares. He didn't warn Vivian. He didn't arrange a meeting. He just went. The doorman hesitated when he saw him, but backed down when he showed the legal authorization issued by Howard. On the 24th floor, Vivian's office was a stylish glass fortress overlooking the city, with an atmosphere that blended elegance and menace. She was alone when he entered. "What an unpleasant surprise," she said, without getting up from her chair. Ethan was not intimidated. "You and I need to talk." Vivian smiled ironically. "You finally decided to act like family." Conceited, impulsive, arrogant, he walked to the table, stopping a few steps away. "The audit is almost complete, and you know what it will reveal." Vivian tilted her head, studying it as if evaluating a newly molded piece. "You're playing a game that's much bigger than you can understand." "No, I understand perfectly now." She stood up, a commanding presence, like a predatory animal finally showing its claws. "What do you want, Ethan?" "The whole truth," he replied. "And the contents of the safe that belongs to my father." Vivian laughed, not a genuine laugh, but an explosion of disdain. "You haven't the slightest idea what you're asking for. I do, and I'm willing to pay the price." For a second, something in her eyes twitched, not fear, but irritation. "Your father believed that too," Vivian said. "He thought the truth would set him free, but all he accomplished was destroying himself." Ethan felt the weight of the words, but he didn't back down. "He didn't destroy himself," he retorted. "He was destroyed by those who were afraid of the truth." Vivian took a step forward, moving closer. "And you think you'll survive where he failed? I'll finish what he started." There was a dense, almost electric silence. Then Vivian smiled, a slow smile laden with menace and, curiously, respect. "Very well. If you want to enter the fire, go ahead. I won't stop you." She walked to the back wall, pressed a panel, and revealed a built-in digital safe. She typed in the password without hesitation. The safe opened with a sharp click. Ethan said nothing. Vivian took out a thick black envelope, sealed with Charles Davenport's personal stamp. She placed it on the table. "Here is your truth, Heir." Her gaze was sharp. "But remember, truths like this never come without blood." Ethan picked up the envelope, feeling a weight that went beyond the paper. He didn't know it yet, but that decision marked the beginning of the climax. Everything that had been built up to that point, alliances, revelations, threats, converged on the contents of that envelope. And as he left the room, he understood something. From that moment on, the war was no longer veiled. Now it was open. Ethan didn't open the envelope immediately. He tucked it into his coat and walked across the lobby of the Davenport building, feeling eyes fixed on him like sharp blades. It didn't matter. For the first time, he didn't feel exposed. He felt prepared. Each step to the street carried a certainty. Whatever was inside that envelope would change everything. But before finding out, he needed to make sure that nothing and no one would stop him. As he left, he noticed something was wrong. A black SUV was parked across the street with tinted windows and the engine running. It wasn't common in that area. Cars like that didn't wait. They observed. Ethan walked away without showing any urgency, heading towards the corner. The SUV started slowly, as if simply changing position. He kept walking, turning onto another street, and the vehicle did the same. The pursuit was subtle, but clear. He took out his cell phone and called Rebecca. "I'm being followed." "Where are you?" 3 blocks south of Davenport headquarters. "Don't stop. Don't go back to the building. Don't go home. I'm tracking you. Keep walking." Ethan obeyed. The next street was busier, full of delivery drivers, tourists, and hurried workers. Even so, the SUV moved slowly alongside, like a predator keeping its target in sight without attacking. Tension transformed into momentum. Ethan wasn't going to run, not at that moment. The courage he had built up in the last few days wasn't abstract. It was a living physical force. He turned suddenly into a side alley. The SUV accelerated. Ethan ran. The alley led to another street, but before he could cross, 2 figures appeared. The same men Gregory had hired. No masks. Confident. As if they were certain he had nowhere to run. "Ethan," one of them said in an almost cordial tone, "we just want to talk." He took a step back, assessing the distances, the flow of the street, the possible exits. Adrenaline clouded his thoughts, but did not diminish his lucidity. He knew if he were captured, they would never see his face on the news. He would just be another missing person in New York. "Conversation isn't what you came looking for," he replied. "I'm not an idiot." The second man took a step forward. "You're getting involved in things that are too big. Let's drop the audit. Nobody needs to get hurt." The words were false, but the warning was real. Ethan moved his hand inside his coat, not toward the envelope, but toward the self-defense spray Lara had forced him to carry. He never imagined using it. Now it seemed ridiculously small for the situation. "Last chance, kid," said the first one. "Come with us." Ethan took a deep breath. No. The man moved forward. The next move was pure instinct. Ethan pulled out the spray and hit the assailant directly in the eyes, who recoiled, screaming. The second assailant ran towards Ethan, but he turned and sped down the alley, taking advantage of the confusion. The SUV sped down the other street, but the crowd began to gather, drawn by the screams. Ethan ran as if the ground would give way with every step. 2 blocks later, a black car from Rebecca's team cut through traffic abruptly. The door opened. "Get in!" shouted the officer. He jumped inside and the car sped off before the door even closed. Ethan was breathing heavily, his heart racing, but finally he was safe, for now. "They were ready," Rebecca said, gripping the steering wheel firmly. "This isn't pressure anymore, it's an elimination attempt." "I figured as much," Ethan replied, catching his breath. "And I think I know why." He took the envelope out of his coat. Rebecca glanced quickly. "Is that really that important?" "According to Vivian, yes. According to my father, too." Howard was waiting in the secure apartment that the federal team had prepared. When Ethan entered, exhausted, sweaty, and still trembling, the lawyer stood up immediately. "What happened?" "They came after me," Ethan said. "But this," he held up the envelope, "is the real reason." The 3 gathered around the table. Ethan carefully opened the seal. His heart raced again, not from physical fear, but from the emotional weight of it. Inside, there was only a USB drive and a letter. The handwriting was Charles's. "If you are reading this, it means Vivian opened the safe. And if she opened it, it means she knows she lost. This flash drive contains the recording that proves who really destroyed our family. And it wasn't her." Ethan frowned. Howard hesitated. Rebecca analyzed the flash drive. "Who destroyed the family?" Ethan asked, swallowing hard. Rebecca connected the device to the secure laptop. A video began to play. Steady image, clear sound. Ethan recognized his father, older, tired, but lucid. The man took a deep breath before speaking. If my son is watching this, he needs to know the truth. The person who orchestrated everything, who blackmailed me, who isolated me, and who tried to destroy me, wasn't Vivian. It was Gregory. The initial shock hardened the air. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Charles continued, Gregory used his mother's illness as a pretext to extort the family. He embezzled millions, manipulated documents, and tried to frame Vivian to take control. When I found out, he tried to silence me. He failed. But he won't fail you if you finish what I started. The video ended. Absolute silence. Howard ran a hand over his face, incredulous. Rebecca took a deep breath. Ethan rested his hands on the table, feeling the weight of all the pieces finally falling into place. Vivian was not the main enemy. It never had been. The real enemy was Gregory. And he already knew that Ethan had found out. War had been officially declared. The silence that settled after the video was so dense it seemed to occupy physical space in the safe apartment. Ethan didn't know if he was trembling from the adrenaline rush or from the devastating feeling of having spent his entire life chasing the wrong enemy. Rebecca and Howard exchanged glances filled with shock and urgency, but to Ethan, everything seemed distant, muffled, as if he were listening to the world underwater. Gregory, he murmured. He destroyed my father. He made me believe Vivian was the villain. He left me carrying a whole burden of anger and shame. Howard took a deep breath. Ethan, this changes everything. With this video, with the attempted kidnapping, with the audit, Gregory is cornered, and a cornered man is extremely dangerous. Rebecca turned to him. Don't think of it as guilt. It's manipulation. He created a narrative to prevent you from getting closer to the truth, but Ethan wasn't listening to advice. He could only think of one thing. If Gregory tried to destroy Charles, and now he was trying to destroy him, then Gregory knew he was about to lose everything, and for that very reason, I would do anything. Half an hour later, Rebecca was organizing the operation. Agents circulated through the secure apartment, carrying laptops, folders, and equipment. Ethan watched everything, trying to keep a clear head, but the sense of urgency grew as if the clock were ticking too fast. Then Ethan's cell phone vibrated. Unknown number, he answered. You really know how to choose your moments, Ethan. The voice sounded like a cold blade cutting through the silence. It was Gregory. Ethan's heart raced, but his voice came out steady. It's over. I know what you did. Gregory laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was light, almost amused. Do you really think a video recorded by a broken old man will change anything? Do you think the world will believe it? I've been running this company since you were too young to know what an audit was. The video proves that you destroyed my father. Your father destroyed himself. I just sped up the process. Ethan felt the blood rush to his head, but he didn't hang up. Something about Gregory's breathing seemed too calculated. He wasn't calling to argue. He was calling for a reason. What do you want, Gregory? There was a pause. Then, I want you to come to me. Today. Alone. Rebecca immediately signaled to Ethan to put the call on speakerphone. He complied. You're not going to touch Ethan, Rebecca said, approaching. Gregory completely ignored her presence. If you're so convinced you have the truth, why don't you look me in the eye while you're trying to bring me down, he continued. Or are you afraid of discovering that you're still the same insecure boy you've always been? Ethan closed his eyes. He knew Gregory was trying to provoke him. He knew it was dangerous, but he also knew something deeper. Gregory was losing control. And men like that made mistakes precisely when they thought they were at the height of their power. Where? Ethan asked. Rebecca's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt him. Davenport Tower penthouse. One last conversation among family. Irony dripped from every syllable. You have 1 hour. If you don't show up, other people might pay for it. The phone hung up. Rebecca turned to Ethan, furious. You're not going alone. He wants to get you out of our reach. This is an obvious trap. I know it is, Ethan replied. But if I don't go, he'll hurt someone. Maybe Vivian. Maybe the audit team. Maybe... He swallowed hard. Lara. Howard placed his hand on his shoulder. Your father trusted you to finish this. But finishing doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. Ethan took a deep breath. Then he looked at the two of them with the clearest conviction he had ever felt. I'm not going to sacrifice myself. I'm going to finish him off. 40 minutes later, Ethan walked through the brightly lit lobby of Davenport Tower, accompanied by Rebecca's team. The plan was simple. Ethan would go up to the penthouse floor while agents discreetly occupied the lower floors and the reception area. They still couldn't get onto the rooftop without triggering the trap, but they would be close enough to act at the right moment. The elevator ascended silently, and each number that lit up increased the weight on his chest. 42, 43, 44. When he finally reached the 45th floor, the doors opened onto a luxurious, yet overly quiet hallway. Ethan took a few steps and found the glass door that led to the rooftop terrace. Gregory was there. His back was to the city, gazing at the horizon like a decadent emperor. When he heard Ethan approaching, he turned slowly, a smile that didn't suit the situation. So you came. I came to put an end to this. End? Gregory laughed. My dear, you don't understand. Your father owes me everything he had, and you only exist because he went bankrupt first. Ethan clenched his fists. I saw the video. Gregory took a step closer, his smile fading. And you think that scares me? I still control half this country when it comes to influence. You're just a scratch I need to remove. At that moment, Ethan realized something. Gregory's arrogance wasn't strength, it was desperation. It was the final act of someone who had finally accepted that he had lost. Ethan took his cell phone out of his pocket. Don't be afraid of the video, Gregory, he said, activating the federal team's live stream. He's not just with me anymore. Gregory's expression broke. It was there that the ultimate truth came out, the revelation that no one expected. Ethan, Howard said into the phone, we have some new information, and you need to hear it now. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on Gregory. Say, the video wasn't recorded at the end of your father's life. It was recorded 2 days before he disappeared, and according to the forensic analysis, Howard paused heavily. Your father didn't die that night. He may be alive. Ethan's world spun. Gregory, for the first time, seemed genuinely terrified, and that was the real revelation. For a few seconds, Ethan couldn't hear anything but his own heart pounding in his chest. Howard's words echoed like a contained explosion. Your father may be alive. Gregory took a step back. He was no longer the confident predator. He was a cornered man and finally exposed. That's impossible, he murmured, trying to regain control of his own expression. I was there. I saw the body. You've lied your whole life, Ethan interrupted, taking a step forward. Why would I believe anything you say now? Gregory began to sweat. Small droplets glistened on his forehead despite the cold wind from the terrace. Listen, Ethan, you don't understand what your father did. He put us all at risk. I did what was necessary. I protected your family. Protected? Ethan's voice came out firm, sharp. You tried to destroy Vivian. You tried to destroy me. And if my father really is alive, you tried to kill him too. Gregory reached into his coat, and for a brief moment, Ethan thought it was a weapon, but it was just a handkerchief to wipe his forehead. The trembling gesture betrayed his growing panic. Rebecca spoke into the phone. Ethan, keep him talking. Our agents are 2 floors below, waiting for your order. He kept his gaze fixed on Gregory. Tell me where he is. Gregory swallowed hard. I don't know. I swear I don't know. That's a lie. The scream escaped before Ethan could hold it back. All the pain, anger, and anguish accumulated over the years exploded in a single sound. Gregory took 2 more steps back, almost tripping over his own pride. "Ethan, listen," Gregory said, raising his hands as if trying to soothe a wounded animal. "Your father disappeared before I could resolve the situation. He ran away. He ran away from you," Ethan finished. "Because he knew you needed to eliminate him to take control." Gregory did not respond, and that silence was the confession that was missing. Suddenly, the terrace door burst open. 2 men rushed out. They were the same ones who had tried to kidnap Ethan earlier. "Boss!" one of them shouted. "The federal police are in the building. We need to leave now." Gregory turned to them, but before he could respond, Rebecca appeared behind the agents, followed by her armed tactical team. "Nobody move," she ordered. The rooftop erupted in a storm of shouts, pointed guns, and rushing footsteps. Gregory froze, his eyes wide, realizing he had completely lost control of the situation. Ethan stepped back, allowing the federal team to move forward. "Gregory Davenport," Rebecca announced, "you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, corporate fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and obstruction of justice." "Shut up!" Gregory yelled, losing his composure. "You don't know what you're doing. This company is mine. All of this exists because I made it exist." Ethan watched him being handcuffed. For the first time, Gregory didn't seem powerful, nor fearsome. He seemed small, insignificant. But as the officers began to lead him toward the door, Gregory turned around one last time. Their eyes met. And at that moment, his expression changed. It wasn't hatred, nor fear. It was something worse, satisfaction. "You think you've won," he whispered. "But you have no idea where your father is. And when you find out, you'll realize that the truth you've been searching for isn't what you imagined." And then he smiled. A crooked, dangerous, almost triumphant smile. That smile stayed with Ethan long after Gregory disappeared down the hallway. 3 hours later, the secure apartment was silent. Rebecca coordinated reports, Howard spoke with authorities, and Ethan remained seated on the sofa, holding his father's letter between his fingers. Charles' words now carried a completely different weight. "If you are seeing this, it means the truth has finally reached you. Trust no one, not even the idea you have of me." He read the sentence repeatedly. "Don't trust anyone, not even in the idea you have of me." Howard approached. "The teams have already started the search," he said. "They're going to use all the clues left in the video, in the safe, in the financial transactions. If your father really ran away, he left traces." Ethan looked at the lawyer. "Do you believe he's alive?" Howard hesitated, and that hesitation was already the answer. "I believe your father was smarter than we thought." He placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "And I also believe he prepared you to meet him." Rebecca approached soon after. "Ethan, there's something you need to know." He raised his eyes. "The video," she said, "wasn't sent by Vivian. It wasn't found by chance. It was placed in the safe recently. Very recently." Ethan felt a tingle run down his spine. "Are you saying that my father might have put him there?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "Or someone who is with him." The world seemed to expand and shrink at the same time. It wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a much larger quest. And now a question burned within him. If his father was alive, why did he never return? And why had he chosen this moment, this very moment, to bring the truth to light? Ethan put the letter in his coat. "I will find him," he said with unwavering firmness. Howard and Rebecca exchanged a look. "And when I find him," Ethan finished, staring out the window at the New York night, "I'll finally find out who destroyed our family, and why." The wind was blowing strongly outside. The city remained vibrant, indifferent to the fate of a ruined dynasty. Gregory was in prison. Vivian was free. The truth was out in the open. And Charles, the father, could be somewhere in the world, waiting or hiding. And it was this mystery that would bring the story to a close and would open the next one. Ethan Davenport lived his life believing he was merely the illegitimate and unwanted son of a powerful billionaire, Charles Davenport. A man whose sudden death left him without answers and without a place in the family. Raised on the fringes of the empire built by his father, Ethan always carried the feeling of having been discarded. Everything changes when Gregory Davenport, the charismatic and seemingly impeccable CEO of the family conglomerate, tries to make Ethan the scapegoat for internal financial crimes. Gregory's plan begins to unravel when Ethan encounters Vivian, the patriarch's long-lost wife, and discovers a safe containing a letter left by Charles, containing secrets that put the empire at risk and undermine the narrative created by Gregory. With the help of federal agent Rebecca and lawyer Howard, Ethan dismantles Gregory's manipulations, uncovers multi-million-dollar frauds, and survives a kidnapping attempt financed by the executive himself. As he progresses, Ethan realizes that Charles's entire life had been surrounded by lies, dangerous alliances, and a power network that used his supposed death to reorganize control of the company. The final confrontation takes place on the rooftop of Davenport Holdings headquarters, where Gregory is surrounded, exposed, and finally arrested. But before being taken away, he makes one last revelation that changes everything. Charles may be alive, and Gregory may have failed to eliminate him years earlier. This revelation is confirmed when Rebecca informs Ethan that the video found in the safe is not old and was placed there recently. This means that someone, possibly Charles himself, is acting in the shadows to manipulate current events. In the end, Gregory is defeated, Vivian regains her freedom, and Ethan returns home with one certainty: the story of your family is far from over. Now he sets out to find his missing father, to uncover the whole truth, confront the past, and understand why such a powerful man would have faked his own death, and why he chose this exact moment to allow Ethan to find the clues. The ending is open, full of tension and mystery, revealing that the true enemy may not yet have appeared, and that Ethan is about to begin the greatest investigation of his life. New York breathed a calm that night, but Ethan knew the peace was temporary. Gregory was in prison, Vivian was free, and the Davenport Empire was beginning to reorganize under new leadership, his. Still, the greatest mystery remained: his missing father. Ethan looked at the letter in his hands, feeling the weight of Charles's words and the inherited responsibility. A cold wind blew from the Hudson River, carrying the promise of answers. With firm determination, he murmured to himself, "Wherever you are, I will find you, Father, and this time nothing and no one will separate us."